It's only abuse if it's violent. We hear this all the time when it comes to child abuse and when a child is being maltreated. So people always say that unless they're like getting bruised up or getting hit, it's child abuse. Otherwise, it's not. So according to SafeHorizon.org, approximately 1,537 children in the U.S. died because of some type of abuse. We aren't always aware of like every type of abuse, especially those that aren't so like out there, and like we don't always know because people like children keep them to themselves. So according to different statistics I found, it happens to mostly younger children. So by learning about this topic, which is child abuse, you guys will have a better understanding and be more informed about what it really is and like different types of child abuse there are. So the least obvious one is child emotional abuse. Okay, so emotional abuse is pretty much like when it doesn't only have to happen to like parents and their kids. It could happen between like a stranger and the kid, or like teachers and the kid, classmates and the kid, or whoever it is. But like it's a abuse towards the children, and it's pretty much name calling. As you can see, like this hand has like a lot of like name calling. So according to ASCA.org, an American survey found that a quarter of undergrad students reported some form of emotional abuse from their parents. So, and another quarter reported emotional abuse outside of their home. Okay, so what is every type of abuse, and even emotional abuse, happens to both genders, not necessarily just male or female. So the next, now that I talked about emotional abuse, I will be talking about child neglect, which is another form of abuse that we can't really tell, even though we know that the child is just like being like cornered out and stuff, but we don't know it's child neglect. We don't identify it as child neglect. So what is it? It's not only just like not paying attention to the children, it's also not being able to provide for them, and just like pretty much like not caring for them. Just whenever they approach you, like as a parent, you don't actually pay attention to them. You're like, oh yeah, whatever, you know. Like that's also a form of child neglect, even though we just think like, oh yeah, we're busy or we can't, handle them. So according to ChildHealthUSA.com, in 2012, 78.3% suffer from neglect. We also see it's the most common, since most people can't provide for the children. Like nowadays, like it's one of the most common types of abuses there are. And okay, so this is the graph where you can see that it's the most common, rather than all the other kinds of abuses, due to the fact that families can't provide for the children. Okay, so now that you learned about emotional abuse and child neglect, I will be talking about the most obvious, which is physical and sexual abuse. Okay, so they are the most obvious because we obviously like know when we're hitting the children, or when we're like not treating them correctly, or just like hitting them with the belt or the chancla like Mexicans do. And then but it's common also, but not as common. And I believe that I found that physical is more like obvious than sexual, because it happens to most girls, yet it does happen to males. But it's not as out there. Like they won't actually tell you because they're afraid, like to actually tell them what they went through, and like they need therapy for that. So the physical abuse we could tell because of bruises, broken bones, scars, or like as a parent, like you beat them up, so you obviously know what they went through. So according to ASCA.org, a large sample of American families found that 2.4% of children have been kicked, beaten, punched, attacked with a knife or a gun. So it's not only like physically with their hands or with like their feet that they're kicking them. It's also like with like they abuse them like with the gun, like putting it to them and like telling them you better do this, because if not this is gonna happen or I'm gonna kill you. And like just like with, like I said, belts, the chancla, like cable cords, and like also knives and guns. Okay, so an additional 8.5% have been hit with an object. So it seems really low, but as we continue to like not be able to notice it, like it's gonna happen more often. So another study shows that 27.6%, both physical and sexual, in 2012, also states that 90% knew their abuser in some way. So sometimes we're like, oh, it was probably like when they abuse their kid, your child or something. If it's your child, like we're like, oh, it's probably someone that they don't even know, or just someone that like came up in a van and like grabbed them, you know. But most of the time, they do know who their abuser is, like in some way, like not necessarily like a close relationship, but just like in some way. Okay, so now that you know, about emotional child neglect and physical and sexual abuse, you will have a better understanding of what these are. So, like I mentioned before, so these, not all of them are as obvious as like each of them are. Like emotional is the least obvious. Yet sexual we don't always know because mostly females aren't like, but like they don't put it out there and tell their parents. They keep it to themselves. So first I mentioned to you guys about emotional abuse, child neglect, and then lastly about the sexual and physical abuse. So Judith Lewis Herman quotes, "Many abused children think that once they grow up, they will develop freedom and they will have more tranquility because they're older and they're like, they have ownership of themselves. But child abuse, like that quote mentioned, it's a shadow throughout their lifetime. Like they're never just gonna be like, they're never gonna be away from it, even though it's not gonna be happening to them as often." And okay, so to wrap up, childhood should be carefree, playing in the sun, not living in the nightmare and the darkness of the soul. Thank you.